You're listening to the Waypoint TV Podcast Network, brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors.
What's your favorite hunting tradition? Is it the thrill of the early morning, the sound of the woods coming alive? My personal favorite, the smell as the seasons change. Who was it that first took you out on your first hunt? Maybe it was your dad, a grandparent, a good friend. Hunting season is more than just a time of year. You know this. It's a way of life passed down through generations. And now it is finally here. Whether you're heading out for the first time or for the 50th, Academy Sports and Outdoors has everything you need to gear up for the field and do it for less. Find the ammo, shotguns, and rifles that fit your hunting style. Grab game cameras and camo to ensure you're fully prepared. All from the brands you trust, all in one place. Text HUNT24, that's HUNT24, to 22369. Again, 22369 to take $20 off your $100 purchase when you shop hunting supplies at academy.com. And if you need a hunting license, pick it up in store while you're shopping. It's just one more way Academy Sports and Outdoors makes hunting season easier.
Hey everyone, this is Captain Steve Roger from Into the Blue TV. And as soon as I feel a little break from this heat, I know that hunting season's upon us. Actually, the first time I ever went hunting, a buddy took me. Wasn't my father or my grandfather. In fact, I took my father on his very first hunt. Well, Academy Sports and Outdoor Stores has everything to gear up for the field for less. Plus, you can shop a wide selection of ammo, shotguns, deer corn, rifle, feeder, game cameras, camo, and more from the brands you trust. Text HUNT24 to 22369 to take $20 off a $100 purchase when you shop hunting supplies at academy.com. Need a hunting license? Pick it up in store while you're shopping.
Spending time in the woods, on the water, out in nature. I don't care if you're collecting leaves for a collage, making watercolors, hunting and fishing, it doesn't matter. We've disconnected from our outdoor world. The outdoors has so many lessons to teach us. Preparedness, safety, beauty, philosophical contemplation, poetic contemplation, an appreciation for those things that were not created by us.
That voice you just heard, you're likely to recognize that. That's Andrew Zimmern, world-class chef, award-winning author, TV personality. Guess what? Longtime hunter, angler, and forager. His perspective here brings up a theme that we've thought a lot about, and I say we. So I'm joined here by Adam.
Hey, guys.
And Casey.
Hello, everybody.
We're going to dive deep into something a little more theoretical, something that we've all believed, and I think I'll speak for like the broader community. We feel this day to day. I think the impact and importance of wild food stretches beyond what we see in the hunting, fishing, foraging community. And I think it's something that it's just more impactful to more people than just us. We've talked about it a lot, reflected on it a lot, especially in the last year or so, and engaging with a lot of the guests and things that we've had on, topics we've covered. And I really believe that wild food is beginning to shape sort of our modern era, and not just like the modern era from a culinary standpoint, certainly that, but I think even broader, as broad as hunting and fishing and foraging and even food itself touches, the activity, the lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, of hunting and fishing and foraging is definitely wider and more expansive. And I think if we think about it historically and even down to just sort of like modern times, day to day, it's that lifestyle has created so much and fostered so much. There's a whole line of thoughts that we're going to go through that's going to explain this.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
One of the things that stood out for me, I saw the other day, an article over on MeatEater. And the article was written by Eli Fournier. And the title of it is Report, Hunting is a Bigger Economic Driver Than Starbucks or McDonald's. And so Eli goes through a new economic report that was released by the Sportsman's Alliance. And in 2022, American hunters spent $45.2 billion, billion with a B, in 1 year. I looked up the numbers too on the American Sport Fishing Association or whatever it is, something similar as well, where you're seeing similar huge numbers of spending by hunters and anglers, so much so that it's having a larger impact than two of the leading brands probably in the food industry. Which is crazy when you think about it, an activity that everybody kind of participates in within this outdoor community. Everything that we go through, everything that you do, every dollar starts to disperse itself wider and is having more of an economic impact than the restaurant industry itself. And I think that's something there, right? And we've seen a lot of shift as we fell into COVID, we fell out of COVID, and now we're trying to get back to normal, whatever normal is. And we're at the point where we're looking at the way wild food has shaped the landscape and how things have changed, right? This whole sustainability conversation. And I think it's really become significant. And you've got this whole group of new people, too, that have come in. They're bringing new ideas into the wild food space. And that's even created, I think, like an internal revolution. You're seeing sort of changes in the way that people think about wild food, the way they're exploring wild food, the way they're using ingredients. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. I get it, right? Wild food isn't a universal solution. It's not something that's going to solve everybody's problems, but it's a positive step in the right direction. And if you're looking at increasing its relevance, it's there, and it's shaping role in modern food systems. A lot of people question and talk about the industrial produced products, a lot of processed food that we're consuming, and people are beginning to challenge it. People are beginning to think a lot about it. And I think really wild food has the ability to sort of challenge some of these aspects that we've thought about. And it really can help address issues we have like environmental sustainability, food security, cultural preservation. And in itself, wild food is built on values of like hands-on engagement. It's healthy. It builds community. How many times have you sat around a campfire and told a story, eaten a bowl of venison chili with or without beans, depending on where you're coming from, and then just had that as a memorable part of your life? And I think if you look about it as a whole, it's really starting to shape societal trends. Maybe small, maybe medium, but I think there's a growing passion there. And I'll offer this, that a lot of people may say that like wild food lacks scalability. You know, we've got all these industrial systems out, people crave food and all that. But if you look at it from the lens of taking a more localized approach, looking at seasonality in eating habits, then I think it offsets the scalability by looking at how individual communities and people can empower themselves to sort of like take control of their own food.
It's the argument you hear most often when speaking about this subject, the subject of wild food as a larger solution to food problems or the food landscape of North America, that it's not scalable. But as we've heard from certain guests we've had on the show and we talked to amongst ourselves, it is scalable if you do it. If you don't just say everyone's got to immediately replace wild food with all the stuff that they currently eat all in one go, it's not a sustainable solution. Like Andrew Zimmerman said, 1 meal a week. If everyone switched to 1 meal a week, think of how much change that would make. Think of how much more people would be connected with their food sources. Think of how much less, like 1 day a week of everyone in North America not relying on the agricultural complex and the industrial farming and all that kind of stuff, and think of what kind of changes that would make. So when we talk about scaling, we can be idealistic, but we don't have to talk about it replacing all food on Earth. or like all like grown food on Earth. I think there's ways to incorporate it slowly into your life.
Hearing your introduction, Justin, it just kind of makes me reevaluate the conversation and think about it from a broader, global, and longer term perspective. And there's such a dichotomy nowadays between wild food and industrial man-made food, or man-grown, where that wasn't the case for the vast majority of human history. And so what we're really talking about is just the conversation about food. It's just how far back do we want to go? And I think people are having the realization now, and we talk about it regularly, that your food isn't just something you buy in a box or a bag at the grocery store. And people are wondering, how do we get to this point, and being more retrospective and looking back and seeing where we came from and how we can incorporate those traditions or those foods specifically back into our lifestyle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's a Sean Sherman quote, the famed indigenous chef, that really sticks with me.
People are so funny that we're just so taught to believe that food has to be purchased, that you have to use money to get food, and it's not necessarily that way, because we can train ourselves to see the world different.
When you think about the way we've sort of like evolved and gone to food in general, and how our consumption of food has changed, right? You look back to probably like the early 1900s, and you get the industrialization happen really hardcore, and you get a lot of people that come back. You've got World War I, World War II, you've got all these things changing and happening. The economy's rebounded after the Great Depression. There's all this change in the way that people are eating food. And I think really that spurred a lot of demand, because people had access, they could afford it, they wanted more time, they wanted more leisure. And I think hunting, fishing, foraging got set aside as a pastime instead of a primary activity for food. That sort of changed a lot of it as well, right? And the availability and access, I'm sure, is a piece as well. When you think about how widespread hunting and fishing was, then you see like the decline of populations of animals and species, and then you see the rebound of, through conservation efforts to then make those more attainable by hunters and anglers. I think that plays a huge role in the way that we look at wild food consumption just writ large. I think there was a point, within the last 100 years where there wasn't an availability. So it just became a natural trend to not have a diet that included wild game unless you were at a place in your life where you had to rely on wild game. I grew up in Oklahoma, and we supplemented a lot of our food with wild game. Wild fish, wild game was pretty prevalent on our table. To me, that was something that wasn't commonplace for everybody else. It was very common to hunt deer in Oklahoma. It was very common to eat it. It was very common to, hunt and fish and do all these things. But I don't think it was as widespread as, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 15-year-old Justin thought it was. And I think that sort of like shaped the way a lot of people think about it.
I think there's been the perfect trifecta kind of storm coming in of like you mentioned with history, where we have people interested in wild food because of COVID, because COVID showed us how fragile our systems are that we have in place, and how I think a lot of people got into their heads, well, maybe knowing how to collect food from the wild might be a good idea if that ever happens again. And I think that's part of the surge in popularity with foraging and fishing and hunting. And we have people back on the landscape doing it, but nowadays we have all these laws put in place through conservationists, the work of conservationists over the last 100 years. So now there's limits, there's laws, there's seasons, there's all these things. So all these people aren't just going to strip the land clean like they may have done 100, 200 years ago. So I think we're living in a bit of a golden age for this kind of stuff, where there's interest, all sorts of people with new ideas, and there's protections put in place so things can't go as wrong as they did before. It's kind of an interesting time we're living in right now.
I think overall, we're kind of like touching on this sustainability and food security piece. And I think that's really important as we talk about like what you brought up, Adam, as far as like one meal a day. or one meal a week in order to be able to sort of shift away a dependency. But I think there's a broader scope here as far as like looking towards specific game animals and species in order to do that with.
Yeah, I just want to tag on, Justin, to what you were saying a little bit about, the thought about wild food sustainability and one meal a week. I think part of that conversation goes into like the non-wild food community as well, and how wild foods are thought about and supported even in areas where they're maybe not commonly consumed. When we talk about sustainability, if there's a cod fishery that's collapsing, you'll have an uproar of public commentary about it. And a lot of those people have no involvement with that fishery whatsoever. But I think there's kind of a innate human reaction that we need to protect these things that can support us. And along the same lines, I think you get that same reaction, like with the significantly lower numbers in hunters and fishers that are in the country and the world today. There's still a substantial support rate. It's somewhere in the 70 to 80% of people that support the ability for people to hunt and fish. And I think part of that goes back to that innate human response that it's a human right to be able to collect your own food and supply for yourself.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we just saw it in Florida, right? The constitutional right to hunt and fish just passed. Like, it's surprising to know the number of states that have that and the number of states that don't. And the ability just overall to lean back. Like, if you're at your end of your budget, right, and you're, as a person, need sustenance, need whatever, like, you can scrounge up money, get a license, do whatever, go out, harvest whatever animal or fish is in season. I would argue that's been a foundational concept in North America forever. Indigenous social structures were built on it. Indigenous foodways were built on it. When settlers arrived into North America, it became the same for them. In addition to agricultural practices brought from Europe and learned from indigenous populations here, like hunting was a way to provide and survive. And I don't think that has changed.
No, I don't think it has either. And I think part of how it's shifting into the modern era is, that kind of ancestral knowledge of harvesting seasonally to more modern influences on how and when we harvest. So, in areas where maybe there's an influx in deer population and CWD is off the charts, all of a sudden there's an abundant food source there, and we know there's a reason to manage it that we never would have known, even 50 or 70 years ago. Same things along the lines of invasive species, where, throughout human colonization across the world, we have animals in places where they shouldn't be, but that's presented us with unique culinary solutions to those environmental issues.
And I think it's something we address in our pig camps, right? We talk about wild pig populations a lot. And, I ran some numbers in thinking about this because I've been thinking about it a lot. So 6 million wild pigs in North America, they estimate. 6 million. So if you think about it from a standpoint of food, an average pig is about 130 to 200 pounds live, right? Whether you're going to go sow or boar. From that, you're looking at probably 75 to 100 pounds of usable meat. Of that, if you just say, we'll say on the top end, 100 pounds of usable meat, that's 400 servings out of one pig. If you took just a cut of the population at 1 million, that would equal 400 million meals for people. And I don't even know, like, off the top of my head at the rate in which pigs produce, but it's insane. They're invasive, they're delicious, and they're not going anywhere. And I think selective harvesting could solve some of those food security issues that we have for just anybody, not just hunters and anglers, but people who need food.
Yeah, people in food deserts, people who aren't getting the protein they need. Like, this could be a cheap and reliable source of protein.
And I think quality. We talk about quality,
very much so.
On the opposite side of like industrial agriculture, you've got wild produced meat, that's obviously, it's an animal. It still may have issues here and there, but you could still, through a system of checks and balances, produce a huge amount of meat.
This episode is brought to you by United Airlines. When you want to make the most of your vacation, book with United. They're an airline that cares about your travels as much as you do. United is transforming the flying experience with Bluetooth connectivity, screens, power at every seat, and bigger overhead bins to help fit everyone's bag. And with their app, you can skip the bag check line, get live updates, and more. Change the way you fly. Book your next trip today at united.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Something we focus on a lot is the amount of cuts you can get out of a wild animal, and even of fish too, if you go beyond the fillets. And if you start getting into the nose to tail aspect and eating the organs, and you get into all these little cuts that I might have gone unnoticed, things that I've seen people throw away, that's extra meals every time. And extra meals means you need less meat in the freezer, which means you need to harvest less from the land. In that case, in the case of overabundant species, your extras could go to people experiencing food security issues. It could go to the unhoused. It could go to all sorts of places. But if you're in your own freezer, I just feel like having, an extra. I think in my freezer sometimes I'm looking at extra like 50, 60 meals with all the different parts I pull off, the bones that I make broth with, the organs, the feed, all the different things I'm playing around with. Maybe they're not for everyone, but you can just get so much more out of your animal. That's something we really focus on, the sustainability of procuring your own wild food and being in control of the whole situation, rather than just showing up at a meat department and grabbing a couple, whatever you're feeling for supper kind of thing. You just get so much more out of it, which I've always really appreciated.
A really, to me, beautiful part of the wild food conversation is how it empowers you to kind of take control of your own food destiny, if you will. You were saying, Adam, it's so different than going to the store and picking up a packaged piece of meat. We know the industrialized system results in astronomical amounts of waste. And when you're harvesting your own food, whether it's hunting, fishing, or foraging, all of a sudden the control's in your hands as far as how you're going to handle that animal or that plant, what amount of waste you're going to have. I think a lot of people in this modern wild food movement value the amount of control and that peace of mind knowing that I utilized everything to the best of my ability.
That's what I really noticed with all the newer hunters we've spoken to, which we like to call adult onset hunters, but the people, they're like usually in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they're looking to get into something. They didn't grow up with hunting, they don't know anything about it, and almost exclusively they've come for the food. And it seems that they're very focused, very culinary minded, very food focused, and they're looking to improve their food situation, improve their health, and also seem to be almost every single one of them interested in teaching themselves how to eat more of the animal, more of the plant. What else can I use? What can I use this for? What can I use this for? Can I eat this? Can I eat that kind of thing? And that's an interesting way of looking at the world compared to kind of some of the old school hunting culture. And I really like to see it. It's like a kind of a new, fresh breath and people are looking for something new and interesting, and a little different, and it's there for them, which is pretty cool.
Well, I think too, it reinforces that it's not all hunters and anglers are like your stereotypical what people consider. Like, we're not sitting on the back porch blasting things with a shotgun, sipping Budweiser. Like, that's not where we're at. And I think that evolution, has proved itself too. And I won't say uprise of the adult onset hunter, because they've always been here. Everybody's gotten into hunting. It takes, someone to pull you into it, or you get curious and you dive into it yourself. But I think it's always been there. I think just it's now through a lot of, be it social media, be it whatever, like you've got some positive forces that are coming forward in a place that still has negative imagery, that still deals with, death and dying and all these other challenging things that society kind of has stepped away from, but there's still a group of people that like we live this and see it. And I think that seeing fresh ideas and fresh concepts come into that has been really good. And I think about it too. I look at sort of across the landscape of like the rise of modern hunting and fishing. And I see the creativity that people have brought from it. Because like I mentioned earlier, you've got this unique product in front of you. You've got a whole animal that you may not be able to get anywhere else. And people, they find passion in the pursuit of the ingredient, not just for the ingredient themselves, but also for the acquisition of it. I think about when we talked with Jesse Griffith and sort of like his conversation about the turkey book that he put out, and his sort of like seeing and hearing his passion for just eating wild turkey.
And I absolutely love it. I mean, I love turkey breasts. I also love the legs. I love the offal and the wings and the necks and the stock and all that stuff. You know, it's just like, it's all just so good. And I tend to hoard it, you know, as alluded to earlier. And so I think that there's just, I love wild pigs, right? I love eating pork and what they can provide, like a really fatty sow. You know, you get the ribs on the grill and all these things. But at the end of the day, it honestly is my favorite. And I think that's what inspired me to start hunting them, is because after I'd had it, I was like, oh, I need more of that. And then the hunt itself started to graduate into this more, I developed more patience in general for hunting. I think I'm a much better hunter now because of, if it makes sense, how much I love to eat wild turkey.
You can get turkey at the store, right? But turkey at the store is not the same as a wild harvested turkey, you know, from the mountains of North Carolina. It's the flavor's different. There's no pursuit. Is there adventure to going to the grocery store? I guess it depends on what neighborhood you live in.
Yeah, it's in a couple,
but you know, it at the end of the day, like that sort of like quest for acquisition adds to sort of the flavor and the experience of it all. You know, I think like Bourdain presented a lot of this, right? It's not just the flavor of the food. It's not just the concept. It's where you're at. It's the air. It's the people you're with. It's this whole like concept of terroir, like in wine, is the same in wild game. I see that, and it's cool to see just people play and use wild ingredients more.
Mm-hmm. We had an episode with Brad Leone a while back. He was talking about how food is so subjective, and it's like, so there's so much more that adds that flavor and enjoyment to the food than you would ever assume. So I think he said when you're hiking on a trail for hours and you eat the pizza pepperoni and some crackers, that's like, damn, that was the best meal I've ever had, because you're hungry. But if you had that for lunch at work, you'd be pretty disappointed in it. But I think when you track down your own food, whether it's foraging or fishing or hunting, that food always comes with a story. You had to go out, you had to find it. You might have been there with other people. It might have been really exciting. It probably was very exciting. Whether it's finding your first morel mushroom or getting a turkey to gobble back at you or hitting a big fish or having a big fish hit your line, like that's super exciting. And suddenly the story comes out. And we've all, I'm sure, been through a little bit of adversity in our hunting and fishing and foraging exploits, and that becomes a story too. And the food tastes all the better for it. Even farmers, like old school kind of small farmers, could talk about a story of feeding the animals and everything, and then eventually that meat coming to the table. But when you go to the grocery store, you lose that story, and the food isn't as good. You know, the food that I've had, and even a meal that I didn't think I cooked all that well, if it was some food that I went out and harvested myself, it still tastes better than the grocery store, even if it's in my head, I think. And it's usually not in my head because it generally tastes a lot better. But I think that having that story connected to your food makes so much difference. You appreciate it more. You finish your plate. You don't throw out the wobbly bits. You don't let your kids not eat. It's important food now instead of just something you picked up on the way home.
That's another area where wild food is shaping the modern era. Interestingly enough, we're kind of going full circle in that the story to the food that we eat is becoming more important in our cultures, even in the more industrialized or man-made food systems, to where you have people now talking about wanting to know where their produce came from, or whether or not it was grass-fed beef or came from a regenerative operation. And again, that goes back to this being just a broader food conversation and people wanting to have that story and that connection to their food systems. Like we said, we're not going to solve the world's food crises exclusively with wild food, but that is one part to a sustainable food system long term. And it plays in hand with those other producers out there with a like mindset, whether it's somebody doing regenerative agriculture or someone doing rotational grazing, knowing that it benefits wildlife habitat. That all kind of goes hand in hand with the wild food movement. And it's interesting how wild food has kind of colored the perspective and the direction in which modern culture is taking our food discussion as a whole.
I think about like conversations about regenerative agriculture and looking at sort of traditional agriculture practices, but I even know like a lot of that rotational grazing and regenerative agriculture, a lot of it foundations got based on like the patterns and effects of buffalo on the Great Plains. Like that, going back to wild food, that is as wild as you can get to say, wait, maybe the way we've been approaching agriculture is not as sound as we thought it was. Maybe let's step back and look at what was working. I think that sort of shifted mindset to like that local mindset of the effects you have locally affect globally, but also to like being able to take a concept that was historically sound and sort of like evolved on its own from wild animals and then apply that to agriculture kind of goes back probably to the original foundation of like the domestication of cattle. Now, granted, was the person who captured the first cow and put it in a pen and that cow had a baby cow, and were they thinking about that at the time? No, they were probably thinking about food. But then that circles back around to the whole conversation of like it all centers around the same thing. I think just the broader perspective and the broader looking at it is it continues to shape landscape, and people are becoming more aware of it, and that conversation is driving of how are we affecting the world in which we're living, and how are we affecting ourselves. And I think to shift gears a little bit, I thought a lot about health in what you said. A lot of people who are involved in wild game, wild fish, forageables, look at it from a standpoint of sustainability, of access, but also health, right? We talked about earlier the food systems and things like that. But looking at it from a healthy standpoint of like life changes and following, I think about Ken. He had his own journey, that didn't start with wild food, but it continues to have wild food as a central narrative now.
My physical and emotional health became the product of a lifestyle based on high-stress jobs, junk food, and too much booze. Over the decades, what began as a weight problem and drinking a little too much on the weekends became something different entirely. By 2014, I weighed over 600 pounds, needed to drink every night just to get to sleep, and was dealing with the high blood pressure that would stroke out a small horse. But it was the depression that was killing me faster than anything else. That's when a friend saved my life and rescued me at my lowest. Among a number of wisdoms they gave me was one that will always stay with me. You never know how many chances you have left to save your own life, to choose a different path for yourself. During this transformation, my relationship with food changed as well. It wasn't just about eating less. It became about eating better in every sense of the word. I wanted to have a better tasting meal with better nutrition from better sources. I saw the industrial food system spewing out food that was literally killing people, and it had come real close to taking me out as well. I also started to pay attention to what the industrial food system was doing to farmers, ranchers, and food workers. It was around this time that I began to see access to healthy, culturally appropriate food as a fundamental right for everyone, and understand the need to defend the folks who grow, raise, harvest, and get our food to the table with renewed importance. I also knew that I needed to be more active in doing that work myself. So I started fishing again as a way to offset buying some meat. Arizona has some great little trout streams for the fly rod, and those mountain lakes of my childhood were right where I left them all those years ago. At the time, hunting seemed unapproachable. I didn't grow up around hunters, never butchered anything other than poultry, and had no idea how to cook wild game. Being an adult onset hunter is a choice, one that comes with responsibility and a steep learning curve. Luckily, I like to learn. I find magic in the outdoors, and you know I love good eats. Over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to go hunting for wild pigs, deer, elk, and most recently, snow goose. After putting in a lot of effort to know where our food comes from and how it's harvested, I felt obligated, for lack of a better word, to level up my cooking skills. I'm constantly on the lookout for new ways to use every part of the animal harvested, new recipes, and different preservation techniques, including canning, smoking, and dry curing, as a way of unlocking more potential. I also added baking bread and making cheese to the culinary repertoire. That's French for how to sweet-talk my wife into letting me go hunting and fishing more often. Somewhere in the midst of all that, I discovered something. Sharing my wild food adventure with family and friends became an unexpected gift. Meals made with wild game and backyard ingredients came with stories of adventure and built deeper connections to people that mattered the most in our lives. Those connections between people are a powerful antidote to a society that generates mental health issues, particularly depression among men, in epidemic proportions. I believe that a good meal harnesses a universal power to build understanding, heal divisions, and even bring the wandering souls back to the fold, if only for a moment.
Food, like wild food, just seems to be healthier. Adam Harrington, who we had on the show recently, said a quote that I've been thinking about a lot lately: for the healthiest food, go into nature. And I've always felt, and I'm not a scientist, I haven't logged all the benefits of each plant and meat and whatever, but I just always feel like I'm eating a much healthier diet when I'm going to nature. And I feel a part of it is that I've taken the food into my own hands. Like in Ken's story, you can't let someone else do it for you. Once you take food into your own hands, you can control what you're eating, you can control everything about it, and then it makes you go out and get it too. It makes you get out on the land and work with your hands and work on foot, and that makes a huge difference, I think.
Yeah, I think that leads right into the additional health conversations around wild food. And part of the discussion is obviously the health benefits of eating something that comes from nature, unobstructed or unaltered by man. I think the proof is in the pudding there. When you are eating wild food, at least for myself personally, I feel great. When I'm not eating wild food that I've prepared myself, sometimes I don't feel as great. Part of the additional health conversation around wild foods is just the things that come in line with it. One of which being the ecological side, where if we want sustainable wild food, whether it's plants, fish, or game, we have to have a healthy ecological system in that area to provide a sustainable population or resource. And the other part of it, at least for me personally, and I think a lot of people in the wild food space, is it's one of my motivations to get out there and be active and live a healthy lifestyle. I live in a northern state that can get quite cold, and it's easy to get cooped up inside in those colder months. But I know that there's the potential for me to go out there and collect some of my own food from nature. It gets me outside, it gets me active. And like Adam said, even sometimes when we're maybe unsuccessful in collecting or harvesting whatever it was we were after, we still come away with a really meaningful memory or story that we can then tie back to those foods in the future.
We're not just talking about the nutritional benefits of wild food, but also the motivation to be active in the pursuit. This made me think beyond just the pursuit and the harvest. After you have a fish, an animal, or you forage, you typically have to process this into an edible food. And the activity doesn't stop once you're home. Like, you don't walk out of the woods. You're like, all right, I'm done with this animal. Somebody comes and picks it up, takes it, puts it in a styrofoam tray, and puts a little bit of plastic on top of it and sends it to your house like it's being served off a hot food line. Instead, you have to continue that work. And even if you're motivated enough to get out and get outside, you must stay motivated to finish the process and see it through. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything that you worked for. And that passion to do that is fueled by so many things that we've discussed. It's driven by the need to get out and do things. The sustainability piece fuels it. The health piece fuels it. And it's driven by this connection that I think we're all looking for in nature. It's this innate human connection to be tied into your food. We've lost the connection over time, but I see this as an emergence, and I'm happy. People are going forward while also stepping back into their own cultures. As we look across the landscape of wild food, every culture in the world has consumed wild food of some sort at a point in history. So it's perfectly natural for us to step back into this. I think about it from the perspective of wild food, and the consumption of wild food ties directly to our own human culture. It ties into our ability to feed ourselves, our families, and our friends, and to feel comfortable in our lifestyle. Thinking through people who struggle with food challenges or people who want to identify with a specific culture, I think hunting, fishing, and foraging provide that gateway. It builds on that community idea. But you can also look back at your own cultural roots and find whatever your family did, whatever, generations past. That can tie in with reviving the cultural heritage that you have around food. Just as you can look at something like jerky or caviar and its origin and history, you can also look at wild food and see its origins and history. It's inherent as we look and grow, but we can also look back and grow. And if you don't have a culture you can identify, or you can't dig into it like some people may, you can always look towards the hunting, fishing, and foraging community themselves.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
It's funny growing up without any hunting culture whatsoever in my life and not really approaching it until I was in my 30s. I kind of found culture waiting for me. I felt like I could kind of be part of this cultural heritage, and I'm not like every hunter, and there's certain groups of hunters that I don't quite gel with as much as other ones that I do more. It doesn't really matter, but there was, as a whole, this culinary heritage that has existed forever that I was kept away from as a child, and I grew up kind of without that much heritage and culture, and I got to access this massive amount of it when I joined this kind of lifestyle. That was really neat, being able to join a much larger village and have meeting all you guys and having people who could give me advice and people who, wanted my advice and just being able to add something to the community. That's been really cool as someone who didn't ever grow up even really realizing it was there, really.
I kind of grew up in a different part of the process, or different part of, I guess, the spectrum, we can call it. To me, hunting and fishing was very centered part of lifestyle. It was leisure activity. It was a way to provide food. It was, all those things. But I didn't realize it at the time, and it wasn't until years later that I realized it, how innately wound it was in my own culture as a Native American from Oklahoma. And I think back on how different cultures and peoples shape the landscape and how that local knowledge is sort of found. And I think one of the cool things that I've seen in the wild food community is there is a contrast in the use of wild ingredients where it was really widespread, right? For a long time, everybody used wild ingredients in some landscape. Whether it was greens you're putting into a stew, whether you're going out and you're picking mushrooms, whether you're, a seasonal fisherman catching food and selling it in a market, in some village in some far off place, or, you're stepping outside your house and going down a trail and you're going hunting for elk that's going to provide for your family for the rest of the year. I think all those things were bound to change, and they did change over time. And it interesting to see how it became something that was dominated by Caucasian men. But now I think that landscape has changed, and I think it's beginning to change. But I say this, and I bring it all in to say that I think the outdoor community itself has sort of begun to open its arms and welcome more people in, to become more welcoming to everyone, no matter of your sex or your race or any of those things, to sort of level set. And that, to me, kind of is something, while I've seen it challenged in places and I've seen people on both sides have issues and be confrontational, I think that it's expanding, and I think people are being better about it all, for lack of a better word. And I think it centers around food. A lot of it, we talked about it in the beginning of where we think, food being the center and the ability for people to access, and nobody ever really argues with that fundamental right. Some do, but for different reasons. But in the end, I think nobody will argue with a person if they're like, hey, I'm going out to shoot a deer because I want to feed myself. I want to feed my family. And I don't care, where you come from or what you're doing. That's the thing that we should all get behind. That's the thing we should support. Come to my table, eat my food. Let's break bread. Let's all enjoy this wild, delicious meal together. And I think so much of that has come through.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we talk about wild food we're primarily in kind of the hunting world more than anything. And generally wild food comes to the plate of a burly guy with a beard and a plaid jacket or something. But it's a huge thing, and vegans are part of that system, and vegetarians and pescatarians and meat eaters as well. And there's a lot of vegetarians who became hunters later in life because they realize that a lot of our values overlap. Even though it seems like we're diametrically opposed at times, in truth, people who are passionate about food, our values overlap, and there's more connections between hunters and vegans than you would ever assume. But I think that table is big enough for a lot more people to join, and I think that for the first time in a long time, there's been more space left for different folks, and I love seeing it. Not just because they deserve a place, they deserve to have that heritage that I walked into, that I was allowed to walk into as a white guy, but also because they're bringing in new ideas, they're bringing in new recipes, they're bringing in new ways of doing things, which is I think always a good thing. To have new voices and different perspectives is always a good thing.
Yeah, and it's not a one size fits all thing. Like you said, we want everyone to feel welcome into communities and in wild food throughout the country and the globe. But like we talked about the quote, one wild meal a week. And that looks differently for the vegan or the vegetarian or the person in the Midwest versus the person in New York City. I think part of that conversation is what is achievable for that person in that place at that point in their life. Maybe it's finding that wild forageable that grows just outside your backyard or your apartment, and maybe that's going on your first deer hunt. It could look very different for different people.
Yeah, and I think sort of like as we close out here, and just like thinking through the holistic approach that we've had, going back to the beginning, wild food has, I won't even say it's begun. I think it's reemerged. It's, as we mentioned, it's like a revolution. It was always here. It didn't go anywhere. Well, in some cases it went places, but we worked hard to bring it back through passion, through sweat, through restraint, the resources that different cultures covet, and, really shaped and played into the entirety of North America, from indigenous populations all the way up to modern culture. I think wild food is here to stay. I think it's great to see it emerging. I'm more excited to see the future, I think, with wild food than I am with any other type of cuisine. We were talking about communities, like how many communities are built around different types of food? How many, people are built around, come together around a restaurant or a type of cuisine or a specific dish? But how many people come together over wild food day in and day out? Deer camp, duck camp, foraging walks, fishing trips, like every single day in these countries, in this continent, people are doing that. I don't know. It gets me excited. It gets me fired up. I think we have a long way to go, but I think we're on the right track.
Right now, the best thing for us in the community to do is to look for bridges. Look to bridge, kind of like what Casey said earlier about people doing regenerative farming. Bridge these systems together, find bridges over to the other aspects of wild food that we might not understand so well, like the vegan foraging movement. Support people who are making bridges, like our friends at Paslaca Winery, who are somehow making a bridge between wild game and wines, and that was such a cool conversation. Or at Tamworth Distilling, and they're actually putting wild game into their spirits, which is so cool. There's people making bridges, and there's a lot of creativity. I think that it's on us right now in this community to look for and forge those bridges and make like beneficial connections everywhere, and kind of push wild food into a serious sphere where it's taken a little more seriously, even though we can see by the numbers that it's a big business, it's big money, it's big time, it's like a lot of lifestyles, but I don't think it's being seen as much as it needs to be. And I think bridges is where we can start.
There's so many paths to get people into the wild food world. I think people just need to find that one that interests them and, like Justin said, lights that fire for them. Whether it's, them wanting to become more healthy in the food that they consume, or wanting to have more of a connection to the meals that they prepare for them and their family, or if they want to come at it from a conservation perspective of what animal or species or invasive plant can I target that's going to benefit me and the environment around me. There's so many ways for people to get into this space. I think it's just up to them to find that part that ignites their fire and go for it.
I'll just leave it at this. I encourage everybody, get out, get off your couch, get out of your house, take a walk down the street, pull up a map, learn the land around you, the water around you. Look up what wild food exists in your region, in your area. Find ways to go out and explore. Get on a website or a forum or a page on social media and introduce yourself. Take a chance. Learn about wild food. Learn how it can benefit you. Learn how it can benefit the environment. And learn how to enjoy it. It's such a magical resource that's really at everybody's fingertips that may be just a few blocks away.